Welcome to this explainer. We're about to tackle one of the most dramatic and honestly most misunderstood periods in American history, the early settlement of the West. We're going to break down the key events and the big ideas, but most importantly, I'm going to show you how to turn all that knowledge into a top-grade answer for your exams. So here's our game plan. First up, we'll get a picture of what life was like for the Plains Indians before everything changed. Then, we'll follow the Great Migration west and see how that sparked all kinds of conflict. And to wrap it all up, we're going to get into the really good stuff, how you translate this whole story into a grade 9 answer. Okay, before we go a single step further, you have to get your head around this concept. Seriously, manifest destiny wasn't just some vague idea. It was an incredibly powerful driving force. It basically gave white settlers what they saw as divine permission to go west, to take the land, and to impose their way of life on it. They believed it was their God-given right, even their duty. This idea is the engine behind everything that's about to happen. So let's start by exploring life on the plains, because to really understand the conflict, you first have to understand the world that was about to be completely turned upside down. For the Plains Indians, their entire existence, and I mean everything, revolved around the buffalo. It was their supermarket, their hardware store, their clothing shop, all in one. This meant their whole society had to be nomadic. You don't wait for the buffalo to come to you, you follow the herds. Their whole culture was built on this constant movement. Remember that, because it's about to clash big time with a very, very different way of living. And this slide right here gets to the absolute heart of the conflict. For the Plains Indians, the idea of owning a piece of land was just as absurd as trying to own the sky or the air we breathe. It was sacred, it was communal, the mother of all life. But for the settlers, pushed on by manifest destiny, land was a commodity. It was something to be bought, sold, fenced off, and farmed for profit. You can see it, right? These two worldviews were on an inevitable collision course. So you've got these two totally incompatible worlds. What was the catalyst that finally forced them together? Well, that brings us to the Great Migration, a massive movement of people that would change the continent forever. And just look at how quickly things escalated. It starts in 1836 with the Oregon Trail, a slow trickle of farming families looking for a better life. But then other things kicked in. You had the Mormons fleeing west to escape religious persecution. And then 1849, the California Gold Rush. That turned the trickle into an uncontrollable flood. Suddenly, you've got thousands upon thousands of people stampeding across Indian lands, all chasing very different dreams. Well, you can probably guess what happened next. This huge wave of people disrupting buffalo herds, using up resources, it was always going to create conflict. So let's take a look at how the US government tried, and pretty spectacularly failed, to manage this collision of worlds. So the first official plan was to create what they called a permanent Indian frontier. You can almost picture it, a giant line drawn on a map separating Indian territory from the rest of the United States. The big problem? The word permanent apparently didn't mean very much. As soon as settlers, full of that manifest destiny spirit and the lure of gold, wanted the land on the other side, well, the government just moved the line. This taught the Plains Indians a very important lesson very early on. Government promises could be and would be easily broken. You see the pattern here. The government wasn't really in control. They were just scrambling, constantly reacting to events they couldn't manage. The failure of that whole frontiers policy created a crisis, and that crisis forced them to try something new. And this leads us directly to a really key event for your exam, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851. Now, on paper, the Fort Laramie Treaty looks like a decent compromise. The government promises protection and money, and the tribes promise to let travelers pass through safely. But that reality column, that tells the real story. Forcing tribes into these fixed territories completely clashed with their nomadic buffalo hunting lifestyle. The whole treaty was built on a massive misunderstanding of their culture. And because of that, it was broken almost immediately by both sides, pretty much guaranteeing more conflict down the road. Okay, so you've got the facts, you know the story. But how do you actually turn all of this into a top grade? Let's break down exactly what those examiners are looking for. Look closely at this slide. This shows you the single biggest difference between a good answer and a great one. The grade 6 answer, it just describes what happened. It's a list of facts. But the grade 9 answer explains why it mattered. It focuses on the consequences. It shows that the treaty's failure wasn't just an endpoint, it was actually the starting point for even bigger conflicts to come. So whenever you're writing your answer, I want you to ask yourself one simple question over and over again. So what?
right? The Mormons migrated west. So what? Well, it proved that large-scale organized settlement was actually possible. The Fort Laramie Treaty was signed. So what? Well, its failure set a new dangerous precedent and guaranteed future conflict over land. Answering that so what question, that is the absolute key to unlocking a top grade.
And that leaves us with the big question to really chew on for your revision. When you look at the unstoppable force of manifest destiny, and you put it next to the completely opposite views on land, and you throw in all the economic pressures, was there ever any real chance for a peaceful outcome? Or was this tragic, heartbreaking collision of worlds simply inevitable? Really thinking about that will help you build a powerful, thoughtful argument in your exam.